May 1791. It is nearly 2 years since the royal family and the National Assembly have moved to Paris. Robespierre speaks often at the Assembly and at the Jacobin Club, a debating society named after the former Jacobin monastery where they gather. Words take on a new power in the revolution, and Robespierre speaks with an unfailing moral compass. He is an impassioned advocate for the people of France. He soon earns the nickname, the Incorruptible. France is now a constitutional monarchy, and the king forced to share power with the revolutionaries in the Assembly. But it seems Louis's share is growing smaller by the day, as he is forced to sign law after law, diminishing his own power, and that of the other emblem of feudal France, the Catholic Church. Louis decides the time has come to leave France and mount a campaign to reclaim his kingdom.
Louis had decided by 1791 that he needed to regain control of his country, and he knew he could only do that with the help of a foreign army. So the idea was to make a break from the Tuileries Palace and to head for the nearest border.
The 21st of June, 1791. The king and queen disguise themselves as servants and, under cover of darkness, slip out from under the watchful eye of Paris. It is past midnight when they arrive in the small town of Varennes, 100 miles east of Paris. They are close to the border of Austria, safety just a few miles away. But they are about to run out of luck. Rumors of the entourage's movements have preceded them to Varennes. A town official stops the carriage and asks for their passports. The official's suspicions are confirmed. It is the signature of the king himself. The townsman is overcome at the sight of his king. But revolutionary guards nearby show no reverence for the fleeing royals.
He keeps hoping that people will recognize him and there will be a kind of rebellion in his favor. And much to his horror and surprise, they are not ecstatic to recognize him. They see him as escaping, and basically he's arrested and taken back to Paris.
The idea that the monarch had tried to abandon his people was psychologically catastrophic. That event really broke the bond between Louis and his subjects. Now they had not only a king who was superfluous, they had a king who was obviously a traitor as well.
With the royal family proving themselves enemies of the revolution, the little control over events that Louis still held is gone. At the heart of the revolutionary government is Robespierre. He shines at the podium, calling for changes of every kind. He demands universal suffrage and an end to slavery in the French West Indies. Most passionately, he rails against the death penalty. In the new age of enlightenment, Robespierre wants to discard all remnants of the medieval past. France had inherited a macabre repertoire of execution methods from its medieval past. Cruel, torturous deaths by drawing and quartering, hanging, drowning, and burning.
Well, under the old regime, there was a whole panoply of very gruesome punishments, and decapitation was punishment reserved for the nobility. And one of the things that the revolution wanted from the start was to have everybody equal in death. They wanted symbolically to have the same punishment available for anyone.
Despite Robespierre's opposition, a new killing machine takes center stage in Paris. Dr. Joseph Guillotin, a physician, proposes a new decapitation machine. Beheading, he argues, is a humane method of execution. A swift slice of steel delivers a quick, painless death. Dr. Guillotin describes his new device to the assembly. The mechanism falls like thunder. The head flies off. Blood spurts. The man is no more. Always a supporter of bloodshed, the journalist Marat prints an enthusiastic rant in his paper, announcing the device's new name, guillotine. It will soon earn another nickname, the National Razor.
The French revolutionaries believe in humane values. They believe that unnecessary suffering should not be caused. And what they like about the guillotine is that it is quick, it's efficient, and as far as we can tell, although no one has returned to tell the tale, it's painless.
The guillotine will silence the revolution's internal enemies, anyone suspected of plotting to return the king to the throne. But it's the enemies surrounding France that most preoccupy the assembly. There is a growing fear that aristocrats and royal princes who fled to Austria are preparing to launch an armed counter-revolution. The assembly calls for a preemptive attack, a declaration of war on Austria. Robespierre argues against it.
Robespierre is one of the lonely voices who is opposing war because he thinks the enemy will win. Robespierre is afraid that the country isn't ready, hasn't got an army that would be able to defeat the enemy. The enemy might therefore come in and destroy the revolution.
Robespierre loses the debate. In April 1792, the Assembly declares war on Austria against a country ruled by the family of Marie Antoinette. A nationalist fervor grips the country. Robespierre and his supporters suspect that the king hopes France will be defeated, which will end the revolution. There is also word that Marie is corresponding with her relatives in Austria, with the enemy. They suspect she is giving away French troop movements in a plot to undermine the war effort. All the while, the king and queen feign adherence to the revolution.
Louis and Marie Antoinette are playing a double game. They are seeming to go along with the revolution many times at the same time as they are conspiring against it. They are trying to survive. If you want to be generous, they're survivors. But if you want to be, look at it from the revolutionary point of view, is they're liars.
With the French army already suffering setbacks on the border, word reaches Paris that Austria's ally Prussia has joined the invasion. Their troops are mobilized under the command of the Duke of Brunswick. The atmosphere in the city is tense. Paris is a tinderbox. And then, the Paris papers print a letter from the Duke of Brunswick. In it, he threatens to destroy Paris if any harm comes to their royal majesties, the King and Queen. The threat backfires massively. The 10th of August, 1792. Thousands of armed citizens, fueled by indignant rage at Brunswick's threats, head to the Tuileries Palace and descend upon the king's elite Swiss guards in a savage attack. More than 800 from both sides are killed. The king finds sanctuary within the National Assembly debating chamber, where a vote will later suspend the monarchy. The French Republic is born. The blade of the guillotine is christened with the blood of Louis's remaining guards, and Robespierre, once a staunch opponent of the death penalty, has had a change of heart. The birth of the new republic can only begin with the death of a king. August 1792. With the king deposed and imprisoned, Robespierre and his Jacobins are locked in a battle with the moderates of the Assembly, the Girondins, for control of the national government. But But on the streets of Paris there is a new radicalism. It is led by the artisans and working men of Paris, recognizable by their long trousers, in contrast to the knee breeches or culottes worn by the aristocracy. They call themselves the sans-culottes, those without knee breeches.
The sans-culottes considered themselves the true people of France. They were not the poorest of the poor. They tended to be fairly well-off artisans, shopkeepers, people like that. But they were people who at least claimed to work with their hands. Not wearing the breeches, not wearing the culotte for the sans-culotte was simply symbolism of being not an aristocrat, being an ordinary man of the people.
The sans-culottes seize control of Paris's city government, while the Jacobins and Girondins steer the country from the Assembly, now reformed as the National Convention. They are struggling with the command of the beleaguered French army, which is swiftly losing ground to Austria and Prussia. While fighting back enemies at the border, the revolutionary government cracks down on enemies within. Royalist traitors who might deliver Paris into the hands of the invaders. More than 1,000 people are arrested and herded into prison. Priests, journalists, ordinary men and women. Robespierre concentrates on the internal crisis, but his ally, the Minister of Justice, Georges Danton, motivates men, young and old, to join the war on the frontier. He is gregarious and flamboyant, everything that Robespierre is not. Soon, Danton's name is heard throughout Paris.
Danton is a bigger-than-life character, a man full of life, full of bombast, a tremendous drinker and debaucherer who, though he's from the educated classes himself, is a guy who, unlike Robespierre, can physically identify with the working people in a way that Robespierre simply cannot.
As the Prussians close in, Danton's fiery rhetoric mobilizes the people, inspiring many to enlist.
At one of the moments of greatest peril for the revolution, the Austrian and Prussian armies are invading. He gets up in front of the people of Paris and shouts, "De l'audace, encore de l'audace, toujours de l'audace, et la patrie est sauvée." Boldness, more boldness, forever boldness, and the fatherland is saved. He's really one of the people who manages to rally the country against the invader. It's an extraordinary moment.
With so many able-bodied men leaving for the front, Paris is left defenseless, its jails bursting with political prisoners. A fear takes hold that the prisoners will be impossible to contain. Marat's paper will later be blamed for inciting the horrific events that follow.
The foreign armies were advancing on Paris. Had they linked up in Paris with these bitter enemies of the revolutionaries in the prisons, of course, then the results would have been fairly horrific from the standpoint of the people.
In the first week of September, disastrous news arrives from the front. Prussia has taken Verdun, the ancient fortress on the road to Paris. The enemy is getting closer. The fear gripping Paris explodes. The sans-culottes break into the prisons and unleash a furious assault on those found within. No traitors are to be spared.
And the sans-culottes went to the prisons, particularly the prisons where refractory priests were being held, where nobles were being held, where political prisoners were being held, and they started carrying out their own impromptu trials that were very short and that very often simply ended with slaughter.
Women are raped or mutilated, priests disemboweled, aristocrats hacked to pieces. More than 1,600 people are slaughtered in just a few days. When word of the September massacres spreads throughout Europe, there is widespread revulsion. Across the Channel, the London Times gives voice to the general horror. The newspaper asks, are these the rights of man? Is this the liberty of human nature? The most savage, four-footed tyrants that range unexplored Africa rise superior to these two-legged Parisian animals. The revolution has turned a corner. Even Robespierre understands that things have gone too far. that the people cannot manage the revolution on their own. They need guidance. The incorruptible rises to the forefront as the man who can lead the revolution. There was a time when Robespierre had pushed for a constitutional monarchy. He now believes the king is too potent a symbol to the enemies of the revolution. A momentous decision is made. France will put its own monarch on trial. With the verdict a foregone conclusion, the only debate left is punishment. The moderates, led by the Girondins, call for sparing his life, which isolates them in the convention.
The Girondins really crystallized as a faction in the convention over the debate over the king, because while they certainly wanted a republic, they were less sure that the king should actually have to die.
But the debate is dominated by the Jacobins, who call for blood.
Why did the Jacobins want to kill the king? I think they wanted to kill the king because, as Robespierre brilliantly said, you have to kill the king so the revolution can live. If the king is right, then the revolution is wrong.
In any system there had ever been, there's only one penalty for treason, and that is death. So in this sense, if the king is guilty of betraying the country in a time of war, then the argument is that he must suffer the death of a traitor.
On the 20th of January 1793, Louis XVI is declared guilty. The sentence is death. That evening, Louis is briefly reunited with his family. Calm in the face of their tears, he promises to return the next morning to say a final goodbye. He will not. He cannot bear his family's anguish, and must not weaken on the way to the guillotine. In the morning, a closed carriage brings Louis to the scaffold, and he calmly makes his way to the blade. He attempts to give a speech. I die innocent of all the crimes laid to my charge. I pardon those who have occasioned my death, and I pray to God that the blood you are shedding may never be visited on France. But the guards drown him out with a drum roll. At 10:22 a.m., the king is no more. In the Temple prison, Marie Antoinette hears the cannons fire, announcing the death of her husband. She collapses in despair. The king is dead, the Jacobins victorious. But soon the enemies of the revolution would claim a victory of their own. Their target is the most extreme of the Jacobin spokesmen, Jean-Paul Marat.